Good morning, everybody. This is Michael Fiebig with Fiebig Architecture, and today's lesson we are going to be discussing the topic of single-stepped elevation changes that occur in the means of egress, such as you can see in this photograph right here. The question that we are interested in reviewing today is specifically how the code regulates, how the building code regulates small changes in elevation that exist in the means of egress that kind of fall into a gray area between more widely known code regulations that deal with this sort of thing. Specifically, we are going to talk about elevation changes that are greater than 1/2 of an inch and less than 4 inches. And the reasons why that criteria is our focus will become clear once we look into the code. So the first thing that we want to go over is the fact that per the accessibility code, we have limitations on changes in level or vertical changes in elevation for accessibility purposes that limit vertical changes in elevation to 1/4 of an inch maximum. That is the maximum vertical change that is allowed to be a straight vertical elevation change. There is an exception to this requirement that can allow a maximum of 1/2 of an inch vertical change in elevation if part or all of that change is beveled. And of course, because this is related to accessibility purposes, the idea here is that so people with mobility impairments are able to traverse a walking surface without being impeded or without causing a trip hazard. So we have regulations that deal with vertical changes up to 1/2 inch. In the International Building Code, we're going to be looking at the 2018 edition. Under this code, in the chapter for means of egress, we can see where we have stairs regulated. They regulate the riser height. That would be the vertical change in a stair run. And what it says here is that stair riser heights shall be 7 inches maximum and 4 inches minimum. So we have a minimum riser height of 4 inches that is regulated by this section of the code under stairs, right? And so the idea here being if you have vertical changes in elevation of sufficient height to necessitate a stairway, that the minimum height of that stair is 4 inches. But what do we do where we have conditions where we have vertical changes in elevation that are greater than 1/2 inch because of the accessibility provisions, but not quite 4 inches? So we're looking at elevation changes between 1/2 inch and 4 inches. How does the building code regulate this? It's a question that a lot of designers don't know the answer to. And so we are going to be going over that today. It is actually found in section 1003 of chapter 10 for general means of egress. And if you look at section 1003.5, elevation change, that's where we find the rule here. So this section says, where changes in elevation of less than 12 inches exist in the means of egress, sloped surfaces shall be used. Where the slope is greater than 1 unit vertical and 20 units horizontal, 5% slope, ramps complying with section 1012 shall be used. Where the difference in elevation is 6 inches or less, the ramp shall be equipped with either handrails or floor finish materials that contrast with adjacent floor finish materials. So first and foremost, basically what this is saying is, in a nutshell, that single steps are not allowed. It has to be ramped. So if you would have a change in elevation greater than 1/2 inch, less than 4 inches, the way you would regulate that is through this elevation change section of the code, which basically says it has to be ramped. Now, there are some exceptions to this, and the exception that we want to look at today is exception number 2, which says a stair with a single riser or with 2 risers and a tread is permitted at locations not required to be accessible. And that is important, not required to be accessible, because if a route is required to be accessible, then you can't have steps in it. It would just have to be a ramp. So we have to obviously be in a location that is not required to be accessible, like a secondary means of egress or a secondary route around a building or facility, or even within a building or facility. But the point is, at locations not required to be accessible, a stair with a single riser or with 2 risers and a tread is permitted where the risers and treads comply with section 1011.5. The minimum depth of the tread is 13 inches if you do have 2 risers, because that would then result in a tread in the middle. If it's a single step, then obviously there is no tread. You simply have a landing at the bottom and a landing at the top, separated by 1 single step. And not less than 1 handrail, complying with section 1014, is provided within 30 inches of the center line of the normal path of egress travel on the stair. So basically the answer to how you can create a single stepped elevation change is with handrails. And in this particular photograph, you can see that they painted the nosing as well, which is a great visual cue to alert persons in the vicinity that there is a step here. So with that concludes our quick lesson this morning on elevation changes greater than ½ inch but less than 4 inches, and how that is regulated by the IBC.